Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. Good. Okay, we're working now. My name is John Dulac. I'm from the International Energy Agency, and very happy to be here with you this afternoon to kick off our session on let me give you the exact title, How District Heating and Cooling Operators Can Thrive and Survive in the Energy Business of the Future. This is a little surreal, actually, with this microphone. I was just saying to Ulrike that I feel like I'm somewhere between Jeopardy and a TED Talk. Mm-hmm. So I probably should give you the answers, and then you can tell me the question, okay? So very happy to be here with this afternoon, and we're going to start off with a presentation. Just as a quick introduction, we have Mrs. Sabine Froning coming from Communication Works with her colleague, Ivo Banek. And so both have been working at Communication Works for roughly the last 2 years and are coming previously from Vattenfall. So very excited to have them here with us. Many of you are probably familiar with Sabine, who is, of course, with Hero Heat and Power for quite some time. So it's great to have her back here with us. And they will be giving you a short presentation on some of their work in the communications area, particularly with regards to how to improve perceptions of district heating and cooling. And then we'll open up to a series of questions that you have asked prior to coming. I also want to remind you that if you would like to ask questions during the presentation or the panel discussions, that you can put these using slido.com and the hashtag EHPMonday. And then as these come through, we will try to, I'll be given a little signal and we'll try to get your questions up here. Otherwise, if we have time, we'll be certainly glad to have you raise your hands and ask questions as we move along. So with that, very happy to have Sabine and Ivo present on their perceptions of how we can thrive and survive in the future.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John. When we got the question, how district heating can thrive and survive in the future, we thought we'd better read the coffee cup to find out about the future. But then, when we thought about it a second time, we thought we better take away the coffee cup and do something else. And this is what we did. We read the minds and hearts of people. And we did it here in the UK, where district heating is fairly unknown. It's about 2% of people who have a district heating, or 2% of the heating is done by district heating. So we went to some of the people here to find out about their feelings on district heating. And we went to Chloe and Ryan, who are millennials living in the UK. So Sabine, if you share their voice or give them a voice, what is their view on district heating?
No, actually, we like district heating. Even if we can't choose the supplier, might come as a surprise to you guys, but we actually like it pretty much. Still, of course, we need to be able to afford it. And we also care about social issues. What we would find really cool is if we could have a say also and take part in the decision making on how a little part of the profits, like 10%, could be used for community projects. So that is what we would really like. We want to, the community to benefit, and we want to participate. But then we have also asked David. And David is from what we call Generation L, Generation Liberalization. It's the guy like you and me who have been following the process, have went from monopoly to the possibility of choice. So David, what do you say about district heating?
I want to keep that freedom. I just hate the idea of being tied up to one supplier. The only thing that could make me change my mind if it's the system were really good in reducing CO2 emissions. And then I want that the money should be reinvested in our city to improve the energy supply. But the best would obviously be if I simply can opt out if I don't like it. And then we have asked a nice couple, Mary and Pete. She is a nurse, he is a cashier. They are close to retirement and they have less than £3,000 a month together. What's their view?
We don't have so much of an opinion on what is the best heating system. Still, we think price matters to us and comfort matters very much to us. So we absolutely must have full control of the temperature at home. And we'd also like it to be good for our community, both when it comes to CO2 emissions and to social aspects.
I'm sure Mary, Pete, David, Chloe and Ryan are around somewhere But actually we didn't meet them and talk with them. We met a lot of other people. We asked and surveyed a representative sample of the UK society about their views on district heating. Because UK is a country where district heating is supposed to deliver something to climate protection. It should grow, but it's fairly unknown. So we wanted to find out what people think. And that's what we did in a large survey with this special methodology.
Yeah, and of course, to find the right questions for the survey, we did not sit down with ourselves and think about some nice questions. We sat down with the UK district heating experts. So we sat down with members of the Association for Decentralized Energy, and first of all identified what are the main critical areas that could influence the perception of district heating in the UK. And then in a second step, after we had identified the different areas, we've been thinking in those different areas, what could we do or what could we communicate eventually to change people's perceptions and how would it affect those? So the 4 areas are choice, prices, participation, and environment. And Ivo, on choice, what did we find?
Yeah, let's look into that. And I may join Ulrike and Matt here over just to come closer to this, because this is a little bit important to understand. We always have a base case, which is your municipality is developing a new district heating system, and you are connected to that. Imagine that. That's the base case. And you see, you can put a mark on that, and you can rank this somewhere between +50 and -50, if you like it or if you don't like it. And you see, this is close to 20, it's 19 actually, which is quite positive. In other countries where we put the same question, like Germany or Sweden, people are less positive. They're more towards neutral. So there's a positive starting point towards district heating in the UK. What we then add are so-called scenarios, where we say, okay, just imagine you are connected to a district heating network, but you don't have any influence on how the heat is produced. This is the second one, where you see acceptance is going down. It's still positive, but less so. The next one is you actually cannot choose the supplier. You are, as David put it, tied up to one. This makes the perception negative. Then people say, okay, wait a minute, I don't like this. And if you put the 4th question here, saying, and you cannot influence the price because you cannot switch, that turns it to a real negative starting point here. And this is where we started with our scenarios to see how we can mitigate and overcome such negative perceptions, because you always have to expect people to end up here, because somebody will raise that question and say, but did you understand you cannot choose a supplier, so you're just tied up to one who dictates the price. So this is where we started and tried to find out what options do suppliers have to mitigate those negative perceptions. And obviously the first thing would be to look into price and tariff offers.
Yeah, so when you think about the price, no influence on the price is the problem, you think, well, maybe we can do something about communicating on price issues or on changing the approach to prices to mitigate that. And in that round, we had a discussion on, well, what is best practice in other countries? What are they doing? We came across Sweden, for example. Price dialogues are quite popular there. An ombudsman would be something that would get quite a bit of credit. In Germany, regulation. In Denmark, regulation would get credit from customers, from citizens. But actually looking at those results, so the light blue results, you can see that improves it, yes, but it is not really a game changer. So for the UK, most important is don't tie people entirely up and say, well, you will never get out of here again. You're obliged to connect, you're obliged to use the system, give them an option. The control of consumption should be obvious, because we were told this is actually enshrined in UK legislation. So let people know that this is the case and that they do have full control about temperatures and also on their actual consumption. Then additional services. What if the company offered insulation, energy-saving devices? Actually quite a positive result as well. And a very good option is that the company itself says, hey guys, we're going to give you a guarantee. You're not going to pay more than you would have with your current heating system, which in most cases is a gas heating system. So already a few good options here, but then we also looked into, well, maybe there are other things we could do. For example, give people the possibility to participate, Ivo.
Yeah, and that is something that is becoming more and more popular. It's a digital society where people expect to have a say in what's happening. So participation is vital for any industry. We ask a few of the things that are popular in other countries, like customers could become shareholders. You could get shares of the company you're a customer to. Or you could become a co-owner of a solar park, which is part of the energy supply and the heating system. They're quite positive, but not so much. Much higher in other countries. Again, Germany and Sweden, this is much more popular than what the people in UK answered. What is popular here is a little bit what we heard in the statements. If the profits stay in the city and are reinvested to improve the energy supply, that is very positive on the far right. And also if people can have a say in how parts of the profits are used to make the living in the community better. Not energy related, but sponsoring bike parks or other things. So this is quite interesting that you can mitigate negative perception as a customer who is tied up to one supplier with things who have nothing to do with that, but are more a community aspect. And then we have the aspects of environment.
Now comes the easy win. It's about CO2 reduction, and I'm pretty sure district heating can be very performing here. So reducing CO2 emissions, telling people that this is the case, it actually changes, it gives district heating a whole lot of credit, and people would even say, well, even if I can choose the supplier, this is so good for the environment, let's do this. Also to be affordable for low-income group, and it's not only, we have differentiated in the survey results, it's not only a topic for the low-income group, it's actually also the higher income groups who say we want it to be affordable for the low-income groups. So also communicating this could be a very important aspect. And last but not least, if it's only renewables, that gives the system credit as well. But a little surprise here, in other countries, again, Germany, Sweden, this would rank much higher than the actual CO2 question. So it depends a little bit on where you are. But we have looked more into the heat sources, Ivo.
Yeah, we asked the people, what do you think is the best source for your heating? And what do you think was the answer that got the most votes? Who was the winner? Any guesses? Solar. You were quite right. Solar is the winner. And this is a little bit as a surprise with you. I mean, we all came through the Scottish solar weather this morning. But this is very typical, even in other northern countries. I'm from Germany, we worked in Sweden quite some time, and solar is #1 there as well. So solar is the winner, no matter what. But then comes other sources like biomass, surplus heat, and energy from waste, almost as popular as gas today, which is today the #1 heating source in the UK. So quite interesting to see what kind of mix you can offer as a supplier. And talking about the supplier, the last question we want to present is who actually should run the business? Who is best suited to be the owner of a district heating network?
And again, we had different views on that. Coming from Germany, my immediate reaction was that it's the municipality. In Germany, everybody would, or almost everybody does actually answer the municipality is the best suited. In the UK, that's not quite the case. So neither the municipality nor the private company took it away. People want to see the best of two worlds, a public-private partnership to do this. So this is in a nutshell, but really in a nutshell, actually, what we found in this survey. But now, Ivo, if we now had to compose from these average results, not looking at age groups and other differentiations, what would be the best of? What would be a perfect UK district heating system?
Yeah, if we take a last look into the mind of the British citizen, we see this paradise here of a British heatwork system. And that would be solar. Parts should be solar. It would be voluntary to connect and to use it, as we have heard. It would be in public-private partnership. the profits would be reinvested into the community. It would be affordable also for low-income households. It would offer additional services, and I think we will maybe talk a little bit about what these services could be. It will offer participation, and now we come to the communication part, which is actually the easy one, because you don't have to do much more than just to tell people. We focus on CO2 reduction, and temperature control is something that is, of course, possible with our system.
Yeah. So is it done then, Ivo? Is this system going to thrive and survive in the UK and possibly in other countries? Is that it?
Not really that simple. What we said is we must read the minds and hearts of people, but actually that's not enough. In the end, we have to win them. And that is maybe also something that we can talk about, how to do that. Thank you for listening. Where communication works.
Thanks very much, Sabine and Ivo, for this very interesting presentation. I think it's a good segue into today's discussions, particularly looking at perception and a much more consumer-orientated market that we live in today. At the same time, I also want to begin our panel with some discussions about what this actually means in terms of operations, as it is not just about consumer perception, but also about how we actually transition district heating and cooling markets into something that is aware of perception, but also functional and, we hope, profitable. So to open the panel discussion, I'd first like to introduce our three other speakers, starting first with Cyril Roger-Decane, who is coming in from Tilia, where he's the CEO and co-founder, and next with Matt Kutra, who's coming in from KPMG, who's the director of, I can't read my writing, sorry, Matt, Director of Infrastructure, Power and Utilities at KPMG.
I'm a partner, but that's okay. I'll go with the director.
And last, Ulrike Jardefeld, who's coming in from E.ON, who is the director there for distribution of district heating and cooling and customers. So I hope I've got this right. And I'd like to start first to ask if you have any comments on this presentation, your thoughts coming from your different backgrounds in this area, if you think perception is all it really is in terms of thriving and surviving in the much more diverse energy market of the world today, or if perhaps there's things beyond that that you might also add. Cyril, well, maybe we can start with you.
Sure. Yep. Okay, yeah. Maybe a few opening points then about the presentation, which is, I think, focus on acceptance and perceptions. First of all, I'd like to briefly introduce myself to those of you whom I don't know. I saw some familiar faces when I arrived this morning. Tilia is a German-French company which we created 7 years ago, and we deal with utilities, communities through a new PPP model whereby we either upgrade existing services and infrastructure or make new one happen, but together with the incumbent and the existing public companies and utilities, and not instead of them as traditional PPP does. As it happens, we just made a report for the European Commission on what is an efficient district heating and cooling grid in Europe and what are the models. Hence, I was most interested by the presentation about those perceptions. The report, by the way, is public. You can find it on the Euroheat and Power site. You can find it on our site. You can find it on the Commission site. So it's easy to access. I think it was very interesting. It was based on case studies in cities like Stockholm, Copenhagen, Paris, Hamburg, Barcelona, so all over Europe, which is good because this business is so local and so tailor-made each time, and that would be part of the strong statements, that you cannot build models out of abstractions. You need to go back to the fields. But I think behind the question, and maybe behind the debates today too, there are some more difficult questions. I could feel there were two on the part of the European Commission. One is, and it deals with what has been presented here, are we trapping customers in those systems? I mean, is this really compatible with our new era of consumer choice? And I think we have to face the question. I think the answer is consumer choice is very open in district heating nowadays too, but you cannot just make the statement, you have to justify that. And the other question, of course, was, you know, those buildings are becoming so efficient, are we going to need anything else than just electricity? I mean, this is also a question, and we have to face it together. Now, to make it very short, and a few opening points maybe to structure the debate about that, I think number one of the key findings is not only has the model of district heating and cooling changed, but it has shifted completely. I mean, this model in the 70s and 80s was based on economies of scale, on production, on grids. It was an era of no consumer choice, and it was basically a decision that people would have to cope with. And some very efficient systems have been built on that. But now, the systems we are developing, but also, and this is, I think, critical to the model, the way we're upgrading the old ones, is a totally different story. It is demand-driven. It is integrating decentralized energy and local resource all the time. It is, of course, needless to say, digitalized, and it is in a permanent seeking of energy optimization. And in that respect, I think about the question of who should own DHC grids, you know, where there are different cultures, schools, histories in Europe. I don't think that matters that much, frankly. I mean, you have some very successful experiences in Sweden, where it is mainly private but very regulated, in Denmark, where it is mainly public, in Germany and France, where it's mixed. It's not so much the question. I think there are three key conditions, actually. One is those systems now should be conceived and developed in a holistic way. That means not only as district heating or technology, but bundling in all the parameters of new demand, changing demand, efficient buildings, digital monitoring of energy, and also land transportation. If you develop a DHC grid together with tram, it's very efficient, for example. So it has to be holistic. The second point is it has to be a community project, even if it's private. If you do not build acceptance, if you do not build with all those stakeholders, you cannot develop such a system. And not only can't you develop it, but usually you're missing a lot of degrees of optimization. If you do not integrate active players into your system, people proposing new energy exchanges, new energy sources. So I think this is the critical part of the game, and that has been a very big challenge for traditional operators, especially the large energy groups who are not used to that. And the last point is those systems have to have open architectures. You cannot trap people within a system anymore. They have to be open with respect to joining heat and electricity, which maybe we will discuss that later on, I think is the major frame of a smart grid. The backbone of a smart grid is not an electricity grid. It's electricity and heat together and gas supply somewhere around. It has to be open in time. You have to change the supply and to revisit the supply very regularly because people come up with new solutions and new ideas. And so it has to be an open system. So maybe those opening statements can feed the debate and feed what colleagues will say.
Okay. Thanks very much, Cyril. I think this adds a layer of complexity beyond perception, as we can see.
Exactly.
Matt, now to you. Now you are coming from a background with a lot of experience in providing recommendations and advice to utility companies, particularly looking at things like financing, how to structure the utility. What would you say, looking at this very complex world of both consumer perception as well as a very vastly changing and quickly changing market, how do district heating and cooling companies actually thrive and strive in this very different market today?
Thank you, John. In terms of, KPMG, we are obviously a big stakeholder in the power and utility sector in general, and we generally do three things. We work with governments and regulators to structure and design markets. Second, we work with companies to thrive in those markets, as in the title of our panel. And the third thing is that we work with investors who invest in it. But that first part, designing and regulating the market, is very important. And my simple comment on this is that we have to realize that this is, from a customer perspective, it will have to be a world of constrained choice. This is too complex. There are too many externalities. There are too many moving factors. And in order to have real transformation, we have to have a degree of coordination. Coordination and policy. And if you look at where energy world is moving, to decentralized energy, you could say that district heating is already there. So whether you look at water or electricity, it's moving closer to local and regional solutions where district heating already operates. And my simple point here is the challenge of avoiding national policy, which might be too much of a sort of one model fits all, but have coordination and analysis at the local and regional level. And I think a solution for this, to put a controversial idea on the table, is system operators, local and district system operators. And I think if we can achieve that, we will create a stimulus where at the local and regional level, someone is thinking about what is the optimal solution, and at the same time is managing the local and regional markets while enabling different players to participate and take part. And the last point on this is that will then enable customers to have a simpler and informed choice. Because without any coordination, without any design, without planning and thinking ahead, and I'm a real free marketeer, so you won't hear me saying that too often, we are at the risk of not thinking holistically enough and also of being too slow to embrace and implement change.
Okay, great. So I think this is a very interesting point about changes perhaps in the business model and how we approach, whether it be municipal or if it be broader than just district heat. Perhaps something we've heard a lot in discussions before, things like energy service provision companies rather than district heating and cooling companies. I'd like to come back to this point, and it's also some of the questions that you asked prior to the panel today. But before that, I'd like to pass to Ulrika, who has a very, let's say, hand-in-hand experience working with customers in district heating in Sweden. I'd like to ask you, with respect to the previous comments, is this the right direction? Do consumers really want all that information? Or is it in fact that we are providing them the perception of choice and managing a very complex network?
So many questions here. Just because the first question was also about the presentation, and also my colleagues, you're like throwing in fire bombs. I don't know, people, if you hear that, but it's like if this could really be an interesting discussion, I think, on all these issues, and I'm sure you have them. But I think I will just briefly on reflection on the presentation, and that is. It's an interesting study that you made, and we made similar, of course. I work now with E.ON, who is, we provide all kinds of services. We sell electricity or heat pumps or district heating, and we also, of course, have business in 8 countries in Europe. So it's difficult to also say what what is the take on this. But from my experience now, standing here, I speak from what I know best, and that is the district heating situation in Sweden. So just to frame that. But and the situation for us is that the questions that you asked here and the answer that you got are from consumers. And I think that's a really important question to deal with, whether you're dealing with customers or consumers. And it's a big difference, actually, because if you see to our district heating supply in Sweden, 93% of all our supplies are to professional customers. It's a business-to-business business. This is what we do. Then we have we have a few private consumers, and they have all these values, and they might care about that. But we see different expectations from customers. And they are professionals, and they expect us as E.ON to be a professional counterparty to them. So what they are asking actually is more, they want reports, they want information, they want to be able to control their numbers, maybe they want real-time data, they want us to be there and help them in their work. Because they are not there as private people, they are there to sort of shine and be good at their work. So that's what they want our help with. I'm not saying we sort of made so much progress with this, because it's a big transition from what we come from, to have this intense, I would say, relationship with our customer who are making many new demands, and we are just trying to keep up. So I think for perception on that question is that the main part, the most important thing about perception actually is not that they are customers, or it's that they are also, they are the ones choosing for the regulations. They are the ones who decide what policies we will have. And that has much more impact. The perception of the business is very important to get us a framework that we can live with. But as customers, it's like it's the price and the price, and then and then the price, and then the price, and then somewhere along the line comes something else. And I realize that it's very different when it comes to a person's own values. But when they are hired to do a job to keep the energy bills low, then that's what they're going to do, try to do, to make them good at their work. So I'll just sort of try to show that. And I think that's common. I know it's different in different countries, but if you have consumers as customers, or if you have professional customers, but I think it's very common also to have, especially public housing operators that are, of course, professional customers, and they are focusing on keeping the energy bills low.
Okay. Great, thanks very much. I'm going to check with my communications person if we have any questions coming in from the audience. Don't forget, you can hashtag if you would like to ask us questions. But I would like to open up. We have roughly 25 minutes left, and I would like to open up to some of the questions that have previously come in that fit very much into these themes. Okay, we're all set. Come on, people, we need more questions. I think, broadly speaking, across all the questions that I've seen coming in so far, we have roughly 4 themes that all of you touched on briefly, and so I'd like to open them up perhaps in a little more pointed way. The first comes back again to perception, and some of the questions were not just about perception of district heat, where we know that we historically have problems with people thinking of us as something as very old and bulky and inefficient with steam coming out of pipes, which is not necessarily the case today, but it's still the public perception very much in many countries. But also policy maker awareness of what district energy can provide as a sustainable solution in the future. So my first question to you, which reflects especially, we had 3 questions coming in about renewable energies in district heating and cooling. And these tied very much to people want them, they see it as a need, but how do we sell this image to them? How can we improve this perception of district heat being a slow-moving beast from the 1950s to something that is in fact very dynamic? If you want to make maybe a quick comment here of what is the direction forward to prove to the public and to policymakers that district energy in fact can be a very good solution? Maybe we'll start, we'll go right to left.
Yeah, I mean, just start with small steps. It's obvious that a large system and infrastructure can't change overnight, but we have seen that solar is so popular, and that is something that is easily installed and used. People want to see concrete steps happening in their direction. And I would also say it's, you're completely right, you have to know who you are producing for, so who is your counterpart, and you have to know the expectations of this group. And this is also maybe important to say what we presented is more expectation than perception, because our method is like you give a as-if scenario, and then you say, what would you say if that happened? So it's more future-oriented. And this group we have been asking, that is the complete society. So they will actually set the trend for political regulation, especially in the municipality, but also on a national and international level. These are trends that will come into regulation and shape the environment. And also how B2B business is done. We see that large companies like Facebook, customer for Vattenfall in Sweden, they want to have green energy to their large energy consumption cooling houses there. So there's the same demand for green energy, and that's on large scale. But if you ask for the district heating network in the neighborhood, I think start with some symbolic, not only symbolic, but some small steps that will be perceived as going in the right direction.
Yeah, I think I'd be one step more radical in answering your question. Two points. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. The first one is, if you take any mid-size, large-size, or even small city in Europe, which has an important district heating and cooling system, and you look into the figures, you'll see that the bulk of the conversion to renewables comes from there. It does not come from windmills around, it does not come from electrical renewable energies. If you look at figures in any city, this is where the energy transition is happening. And figures are very spectacular, and people are unaware of that. So if the question of people is to say, how can we combine renewables and district heating and cooling? The answer is, quite obviously, this is the best way to go. That is the first point. And the second point is, if you want to develop electrical renewables beyond a certain point and be able to manage all the instability that goes with it, you have an expensive and difficult way forward, which is to put electricity storage everywhere. And you have a smart and efficient way forward, which is to combine that with district heating and cooling, and more generally with thermal energy. If you look at what is happening in Denmark, In Denmark, the peak production of renewables sometimes is over the full peak demand of the country in electricity. How do they do that? They have a few other items like being connected to Scandinavia and Germany. They have very flexible thermal power plants, more than in Germany, more than in France and that. But the core thing is that they have small cogenerations everywhere. And that in reality, that enormous electricity renewable park they have is totally connected with thermal local systems, hence to storage, hence to heat pumps. And this is how the system is efficiently managed. So in both ways, the key driver in any local energy transition is the district heating and cooling system taken as a whole, not necessarily only the public grid, but the whole of it.
If you were one step more radical, I want to be 5 steps more radical, but maybe not as radical as it sounds.
Flying.
Exactly. I think we need to work on several different levels. I think the public awareness of opportunities that decentralized energy is creating is still very low. I think customer engagement is still very low. I think CO2 is something people understand. If you start talking about decentralized energy solutions, your audience reduces a lot. So I think you have to have it at several different layers. I think you have to have education and informational campaigns. But there has to be a national policy that encourages and in fact potentially requires rethinking local energy systems. Right? If you leave it to a choice or an option, you're just not going to have a market reacting, in my view, quickly enough. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to mandate the policy, but I think what you have to mandate is, and encourage, is rethinking energy systems and thinking about what is the new optimal system. Right? And then you have to obviously have customer engagement as well, and we've learned a lot from other regulated utilities, energy networks, water, that customer engagement can achieve quite a lot. But I go back to my point, and I think your point is very well made, that you need to think locally, and district heating has a huge role to play in those efficient solutions. But in my view, you cannot leave it to customers, and you cannot leave it to markets, because the coordination problem and optimization problem is too complex. So you have to have a body that is not at the central government level, but is also not at the just purely market or customer level, that thinks about new solutions. And for me, that is local and district system operators who can think about what could be that set of solutions. And we have to be a lot more radical in terms of rethinking the local infrastructure. We try to fit into existing infrastructure in the presence of decentralization in water, decentralization in electricity, heat, fiber. We have a real opportunity to rethink and redesign local infrastructure. But we are not brave enough to try to make this happen.
No, I don't agree with you here.
Right.
Can you say that on stage? I'm sorry, I'm trying to learn to be polite in an international way with not agreeing with somebody. In Swedish it's just normal, but we just said how we have a debate.
I don't dare to ask what you do in Sweden.
No, I'm not a market liberal, really, but I'm convinced that the way forward is to start with the customers and not have regulating. At least I see that as a success, to go from having the customer powers to want district heating themselves. And I see that. And I mean, in Sweden we had this, we started from a different point, so it depends on the market that you start. But having the competition where a customer actually can choose another alternative, where they feel they can, you can disconnect from a district heating network in Sweden in 3 months maximum, according to the law. So 3 months is as long as you can be tied up, and usually it's 1 month. Many companies have that. And that is, so it's a free market, and you can go for another solution if you want to. And that is the best thing that ever happened to us, I think, because suddenly it put the pressure on the district heating companies to change, to become more efficient, to become more customer-friendly, because actually we see they are leaving. If we don't behave, they will leave us, and that costs us a lot of money. And I would not like, I mean, it would be a failure, I think, to have to go back to having the government decide what people should, how they should warm their houses. So I'm very, I would like to encourage the audience, I don't know, but to keep to that dream, because I have not, it seems like that it's a little bit to give up, to say that they don't know what's best for them, they don't want us because we're not good enough, and instead try to be as good as we can and make them choose us. And it's so much power also, I think, in what was discussed before on digitalization and driving business models and driving innovation from the customers. Because as soon as we open up and have a discussion there, it's like, I mean, when I look at what happens in our companies, like we have a customer debate and they come to us and they say, we want this, we want you to do this. And suddenly, it gets a lot of motivation internally in our company because somebody actually wants us to develop this. And we make it happen very fast. So I'm very, very sort of trying to keep that customer relationship very tight.
So
and
just to clarify, I'm not against the
in,
government. I'm not against the customer or competition. That's not by any means what I'm saying. I fully agree with you. Customer engagement and preserving as much as competition is critical. But what I'm saying is that you need stimulus and you need coordination. And you need to have ability to rethink long-term solutions, right? Because otherwise, in many countries, you just will not embrace those opportunities quickly enough.
Maybe.
Okay, so sorry, just for sake of time, I know this is a very interesting subject, but Sabine, you had a comment and we have a question from the audience.
Yeah, sometimes it still seems to me that the customer is seen almost as a threat. And actually, in everything that we've been doing, we've said there are so many opportunities with the customer. There's such a big potential of new ideas, things that when you're an expert and you're only moving in an expert crowd, you wouldn't even think of. And then I think the customer is not the customer, it's many customers. That's why I've picked different groups, because we've seen very different results for different groups. And if you think about those who will make the future of any district heating system that you will build now, it's the millennials. And the millennials have a very clear view that they want not only to be aware and be informed, they want to be engaged and they want to participate, they want to own the stuff. And we've been in so many debates recently where the word utility was not even dropped anymore. Nobody in those audiences thought that you still need them. So then you need to make yourself relevant with all that system intelligence, but it needs to meet the expectations of those people, because otherwise we'll be out of business.
Okay, thanks. I want to come back to this and take it to a different area, but I want to check first what we have here as a question. If we can borrow a microphone.
I think we have a very shy audience because the question is from Anonymous. So are there any good examples of competition in heat supply giving customers choice on a heat network?
Okay, so I want to pair this with a second question also because of time and take this. So we've talked a lot about consumer perception. Celia, you mentioned the energy transition. And I think all of you have mentioned really very good examples. And I think these are, to a certain extent, the top 10% of the markets. And that we have a lot of the market that has a lot of complicated issues surrounding decision-making, energy investments, distribution, financing. Now, this is not necessarily a consumer perception issue, but how do we actually move forward the market? So taking from this question and adding perhaps both the financing policy piece, thinking about how do we actually make a successful business model in different contexts with different consumer perceptions as the last point here, if we want to do a quick roundtable of what is the actual business model itself? So moving away from perception, but how do we make this successful in the future? So why don't we start with you, Celia?
I would like to make a difficult attempt to wrap up the previous exchange in your current question.
So try to keep it in line.
And be very brief, because just using a case study. I think it's very difficult to have all those debates without being in case studies. So 1 minute about a case we know very well, and some of you know it, because I've seen Thierry de Préaumont, the CEO of IDEX, who's building that grid, south of Paris in Saclay. Saclay is the biggest research and university cluster in France now. And we've conceived, and we're now building together with the national authority, district heating and cooling network out of low temperature geothermy. Now, the business case question at the beginning, it's an obvious showcase energy transition project, and they were looking for a business model. On the one hand, I think Ulrika was right, which is you have to go to customers to see what happens. But in this case, the customers were all these universities, research centers, new buildings. All of them had energy gurus, and all of them told them, you don't need energy anymore. Forget about it. Just a good electricity connection, and that's going to be it. And there we were, standing in the name of public interest, saying we think it has a lot of relevance in terms of environmental externalities, in terms of stability, in terms of technology, to use this geothermy. We'll have the safest energy, we'll have the way to make energy exchanges, which otherwise will not happen, and there's... So what did we do? Basically, we had to go to all these people and try to convince them that this would be a good deal for them. Although the National Public Authority had the power to make the network mandatory, but they did not want to do that. They did want to go through customers. But on the other hand, where Matt is right, is that if someone does not do that job, it does not happen by the spontaneous aggregation of market behaviors. Yeah. So there's a bit of the two in the dynamics. And this is what the energy transition is about if you want to make it wirtschaftlich, as we say in Germany.
Matt?
And I think the challenge, I mean, I fully agree with you, and frankly, I agree with Ulrika as well that the customer has to be, the customer has to participate in this. But I think the real challenge is how do you strike that balance, right? Where do you strike that balance? How far do you need coordination, right? And where can you leave constrained customer choice, right? And it seems to me that we need to think also much more broadly than just about heat or indeed even energy. Because we can, as I said before, we can rethink all of the local infrastructure. And the problem of retrofitting, as we all know, and local infrastructure is the sheer upfront cost, right? So an element of coordination is necessary. But if we can strike the right balance between coordination and capturing the externalities, on the one hand, and on the other hand, having the customer fully embracing and leaving as much customer choice as possible, then I think we can drive that change a lot quicker.
Yeah, and I think if I understood your question, also what you wanted also is how can a business survive in the major energy transition we're in? And I don't think anybody here has the answer to that because, of course, what's happening with E.ON as many other big energy companies is that we are hit super hard by all the changes that we have. From the Swedish perspective, we have very low electricity prices. We actually had negative electricity prices over Christmas in the middle of the winter, and that is super hard to be an electricity provider when you are paid to give it away to somebody, or you have to pay to give it away. But so we're all struggling, I think, from finding this business model. Actually, I see there from what it looks from the E.ON perspective is actually that district heating and cooling is one of the areas where we actually can make some profit on the actual selling of a product. And we have to team that up with, I think, with providing services. It's a major shift for an energy company to go from being a bulk provider of electricity to going to selling services. And we are facing some competitors that have been selling services for their entire corporate life. And it's very difficult for us. But I think what we have in the baseline is that we have a really good product, and we need to sort of build some services around that to make it super attractive. Because as Sabine was saying, I think this is actually the feeling that I had as well, with that the utilities, or do we even have a future? And that is because algorithms and computers can do the job that we used to do. And what our core business used to be was to make an invoice, which is actually very difficult for you who don't do this every day, is to have a measurement, have a lot of data and make an invoice. 10 years ago, nobody could do that, but an energy company. Today, it's like two guys from high school sitting in a basement that took away our entire sort of the core business that we had. What we still do is sell district heating and cooling with some actually decent profits, and but we will not keep those customers unless we do something around them. And I cannot fathom that the regulator sort of would try to prevent our business from going down, because I mean, if somebody can do it, 2 guys from high school in a basement can do it cheaper than us, then why should we be in this business? So I think it's a very difficult question to get the right answer to.
For sake of time, I do want to give you, Sabine and Woody, the time to respond, but I'm going to ask you to maybe wrap this up in your comments as well. So as a last question fitting into this discussion, if you had to extract, let's take something from the discussion, what would be your one recommendation, either for utility companies, or district energy service providers, for policymakers? You choose. What do you think we need to set forward as a recommendation for district energy companies to thrive and survive in the future?
Yeah, go for the people. Stick to the people. That would be like winning the hearts and minds of the people. Don't go for the regulation. Don't go for the market, because you will be too late. Because everything that we see as fundamental changes today is driven by what some people call the former public, the former audience, the people formerly known as passive, just waiting for somebody else deciding on their behalf and telling them about it. This has changed. It will not come back. The people have the power today, and they will use the power. They will not give it back. And the only chance for district heating operators and other utilities is to maintain the customer interface they have today and to make it larger, because this is where you have the dialogue and the kind of feedback that you need to find your new business model. Of course it's not easy, but it's easy to see if you don't do this, if you stick to some politician somewhere and try to influence regulation, and that is your strategy, you will be out of business very soon. You need to stick to those people that you have, and you need to find more interfaces to people. And that is, as you said, you need to broaden your business, you need to offer services and all kinds of things that customers want, that people want, because people don't want to have 10,000 different interfaces to all things that relate to their personal life and to their home. And if you see Google coming in with Nest and offering smart home things that we could offer as utilities, there are business cases taken by somebody else. So don't lose more time, stick to the people, they will tell you what to do, and there will be your future business.
Okay. Thanks, Ivo. Sabine?
Yeah, I can only add to that, share. Not only create awareness, share. Let them in. Let them participate in creating your business models. Be diverse in the business models. People have very different expectations depending on where they live, how old they are, what experience they had, under which conditions they live, and they all need to be served. And they are best served if they have a say in how this is going to happen. So co-create them with them.
Thanks. Serene?
Yeah, I feel a bit embarrassed because I know how it feels to run a utility, and all our colleagues here are going to think, oh, here they are giving us good tips. Yeah. We're going to step out and solve our problems. Nevertheless, I mean, a low-hanging fruit would be to say, of course, shifting to service, but quite revert to that. My point would be to say, don't defocus from infrastructure. I mean, this business is not immaterial. It's not a kind of digitalized voodoo flying in the air. There's a lot of physical reality in it. And this physical reality is changing. And what we are really at grips with, we manage in Europe to make a very efficient instant market, merit orders in electricity and gas and all that. I mean, that functions at the second unit, so it's done. We're in a very difficult situation with respect to the slow merit order, which is where can we invest our money? Where do we invest the next euro in infrastructure? What is smart to do? What is the merit order there? And I think utilities, local utilities, having more than one service, especially multi-utility ones, have a very strong role to play in designing this merit order. They cannot do that on their own. They have to work with authorities and regulators, but they have to be a driving force in that, because this is where they will create value, and not only by managing, maintenance and or selling electricity, which is a commodity those days.
Good, thanks very much. Matt?
Well, to be honest, I would echo what you said. And as you said, who are we to teach the companies how to make money? But, I think it's worth thinking about those solutions, right, rather than products. This is not about selling products. This is about finding local, regional solutions which are as integrated as possible, bringing all the stakeholders together, right? And I think that is the big challenge. And if you can do that, then you effectively capture the market and can make money on it.
And I think two things. You need to get busy with the digitalization. You thought it was, I don't know who said it was a lot with 1/3 working with this. I think this is, I know it's, maybe nobody makes money out of that, maybe, but customers are expecting to have an app to see their consumption. So it just needs to be done. And also you need to strengthen your relationship with your customer to be able to provide them with services. To defend also the business that you have, to make it really sad to leave what they have today and make their lives easy, to know that what they have, to keep them. Yeah, that's my advice.
All right. Well, thanks very much. We've heard a lot of very interesting things here, a lot about perception today. It's good to see a little bit about the business models as well, even though it's not so straightforward, perhaps. And thanks very much for the one question. If you want to raise your hand, we'll punch you out. And also for all of you who sent your questions in previously. The same, I'm assuming, is the case for the coming sessions. So please do send in your hashtags for further comments and interaction. And then, of course, we will break now for coffee. So very much look forward to hearing your questions, perhaps in a more anonymous setting, if you would like to speak to myself or to the speakers during the coffee break. And a big round of applause to our speakers today. Thanks very much for participating.